If governors could be seated, the session is about to begin.
And then you put them in a community college classroom where they're learning 3D printing of it and so broadcasting. But it's a fabulous thing to see. It's good to see.
Morning. Good morning. Just fine.
The sun's out now.
It's a beautiful day.
You're hot.
It was fun last night.
Different? Good. Wait till tonight. Good morning. I'm sorry we are starting this a little bit late. We just had a lively discussion with Secretary Price, and so we're a bit delayed here. But this discussion this morning is no less important, maybe more important, just as important as the healthcare discussion that we just came from. This morning, we are very lucky to have two amazing leaders with us, Judy Marks from Siemens. Thank you for joining us, Judy, and Zoe Baird from the Markle Foundation. This morning, we're going to be talking a little bit about workforce training and job training, and specifically apprenticeships. This is an issue near and dear to the hearts of every governor who's here and every governor in the 50 states, mainly because, as we were just talking about, we governors have an incentive to get this right. The employers in our states are counting on us to figure out how to deliver them a trained workforce. And that absolutely includes four-year college, it includes community college, it includes career and technical education, but it includes and needs to increasingly include apprenticeship programs, which I know many of you have started and are expanding. Here in Rhode Island, we are big believers in the apprenticeship model. Very early on in my term, we received a grant from the federal government around apprenticeships. We have dozens of apprenticeship programs. They're working. Employers love them. And we are especially focused on what I call the non-trade apprenticeships. Things you may not think of as apprenticeships. We have one in cyber, one in IT, one in process technology. Non-trade, but incredibly important, high-growth areas. And we are looking to learn from both of you this morning to figure out how we can expand and improve and deepen the work that we're doing. So it gives me great pleasure to first introduce Judy Marks from Siemens. Thank you for joining us this morning. Judy is the president and CEO of Siemens Government Technologies. Before becoming CEO of Siemens USA, she held various senior level positions at Lockheed Martin and IBM Federal Systems Company. I've had the opportunity to chat briefly this morning with her. In addition to being a seasoned, successful, experienced senior executive who's delivered complex systems, she's a real believer and leader in the apprenticeship model. Right now, they have thousands of open positions in the United States, 2,000 open positions. She needs to get them filled. And she is a believer in apprenticeships, is operating apprenticeships in 4 of their plants around this country and is expanding, and we're just delighted to have you here with us. So, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Governor Raimondo, and thanks to the NGA for inviting me. Besides my responsibilities leading Siemens here in the United States, I also have the privilege of chairing our 501c3 Siemens Foundation, which is focused on workforce, which is focused on apprenticeships and everything around facilitating that. But we believe this is more than just about higher paying jobs. It is. This is more about growing our economy. It is. But this is about creating talent we need today to be able to industrialize our nation in what we believe is truly an industrial renaissance. And that renaissance, while it's happening across the country, it happens at the state level. We believe this is not just a state issue, but we believe that governors, more than anyone else, sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
It's a good place to leave them hanging.
Okay. We believe that governors have not only the most motivation, but the most tools and ability to make this a reality for us. So let me share a little bit of what we've done as Siemens and as the Siemens Foundation so that we can hope that states can learn from each other and that we as industry can do more than just share the demand signal and what skills are needed. We can share what's worked successfully overseas as well. We're working with the NGA and the Center for Best Practices because we find that that is the best way to proliferate best practices. We've chosen 6 states that we're already working with to be able to deal with skills and training. We're also working with 12 states on apprentice registrations and how we can make that happen quicker and more efficiently. But most importantly, recently we had a real unique opportunity with NGA and with the JP Morgan Chase Foundation to share what works over in Europe. And we had the privilege of sponsoring and joining Governor Dugard, Governor Fallon, Governor Bevin, as you got an opportunity with your staffs to see really what works in Germany and Switzerland firsthand. And more importantly, how can we tailor that when that comes back to the states? And I don't want to forget Governor Hickenlooper, because what you're doing with youth apprentices in Colorado is just amazing, and we want to take those lessons as well. But today we're facing some interesting challenges in the new industrial economy, and I see that, as do my colleagues. Here at Siemens, we've been in the US for 160 years, and we've had to reinvent ourselves many times along those 160 years. We've got 50,000 US employees and 60 manufacturing plants of our own. But we think the time has come where we're seeing the convergence of software and we're seeing the convergence of the digital economy. And that's what's driving manufacturing today. The advanced manufacturing we're seeing is not the manufacturing you think of in the past. It is about automation, but it's also about having those human skills coming out of the high schools in our country and being able to apply those skills in a digital economy. Now, you'll hear a lot about, well, Jude, but aren't robots taking over? And I want to be really clear here and factual. In Germany, we use 3 times as much robotic technology as we do here in the United States. And yet there are twice as many manufacturing technicians in Germany as there are here in the United States. There's a role for robots and technology, and there's a role for humans. But the humans we need more than a high school education. They need a different skill and education program. And we've moved away from that vocational training that was the bedrock of how we built the last industrial revolution. We are at a new industrial revolution today. It's all about advanced manufacturing, and we need workers who can do that. So what we did to fill our own openings is we turned internally to our roots, and we applied the German apprenticeship model. In 2010, we brought that over here, and we started that in our facility in Charlotte, North Carolina, because we moved a facility from Canada here, and we needed workers who could have the ability to build large gas turbines, steam turbines, et cetera. So we started an apprenticeship program, and we started it with the local community college. We set the curriculum with us, and these students, after 4 years, they work for us part-time, we pay their tuition, so they have a debt-free education, they get an associate's degree, and they also get a journeyman's certificate and a guaranteed job with us. And I'll share something with you at the end of this little introduction that I think you'll find highly energizing when we talk to one of our apprentices. But beyond that, we think we also have a responsibility to employ even a larger workforce. We've brought on 2,500 veterans and committed to another 1,000 veterans. But it's not just about the people. We have to create the curriculum. We have to create the environment. We have to tell you what the demand signal is and what skills we need. And then we have to give these students and the community colleges and universities the tools to be successful. So in the past 5 years, we've granted $3 billion of industrial software to community colleges and universities throughout the nation, so that these students, whether they're getting an AA degree, or associate's degree, or a 4-year degree, come out with the tools, the technology, and the analytics they need to be able to perform. I can't stop this discussion without talking about one of the obstacles we face, and it's somewhat of a societal obstacle. It's a stigma that's associated right now with technical education. And it starts early in the high schools, it starts in our communities, it starts with our parents. Our typical apprentice when they graduate, and we have apprenticeships in 4 states, we're doubling that to 8 states this year, earns between $55,000 and $60,000 starting the day they finish their apprenticeship. They proudly wear their apprenticeship logo on their work clothes. It's something in Germany where in our dual citizen, when you're 14 years old and selected to be an apprentice, that is looked upon as positively as selected to go to a university. And here in the United States, we don't look at it that way. So as our Siemens Foundation, we recently sponsored a survey, and we talked to the parents and students who are involved in vocational education and career technical education. And they're very pleased with where it's going, and they want to be part of what we call middle skills and industrial reskilling. So we believe industry's ready. We believe the states are the absolute best place to get it done. We commend governors for making this real. As industry, we want to work with you to do that. And I'd like to share with you a piece that was just on the NBC Nightly News from our Charlotte, North Carolina facility. You will find the energy of Chad Robinson, one of our apprentices, who ironically had the opportunity. He was accepted to a 4-year mechanical engineering school at university, and he turned it down to become an apprentice at Siemens because he did not want the college debt. And he will finish our apprenticeship program shortly. If he chooses, he can go on, if he chooses, and get a bachelor's degree through our tuition reimbursement. But you will find his energy and his passion for what he does and what he learns remarkable. So let me share that video with you.
This is the sound of manufacturing in 2017 at Siemens Energy Hub in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I don't see or hear those big machines that I think of manufacturing.
Yeah, today's manufacturing is pretty different. It's custom, it's quiet, and it's all based on computers.
Siemens CEO Judith Marks says that enables her company to be more efficient and competitive. But finding workers to build gas turbines was one of her biggest challenges.
We actually moved the product line from Canada here. And when we moved here, we needed about 800 employees. We were coming up a little short.
She says only 15% of those who applied had the skills needed. To bridge the skills gap, Siemens started an apprentice program to develop the mechanical and technical abilities called middle skills. A gap so big an estimated 2 million jobs may go unfilled in the next decade.
I've always had an interest in engineering, mechanical engineering.
Instead of going to a 4-year college, Chad Robinson chose to be an apprentice.
They pay for my tuition, they pay for my books, and then on top of it all, I'm getting paid to sit in class.
Robinson works in the factory and attends community college. After 4 years, he will have an associate's degree, a journeyman certificate, a salary of at least $50,000, and skills crucial to the larger economy.
If we don't provide a labor force that can fill that work, technology, foreign companies, outsourcing are going to replace the opportunity to earn your living in those occupations.
Taking a page from successful apprentice programs in Europe, Siemens now has similar training at 3 more U.S. factories.
It is an investment, and you have to start there. It's a strategic investment in people and talent and our future.
Benefiting the company and the economy. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Charlotte.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Very impressive, and thank you for your commitment to this work. I now would like to introduce Zoe Baird. Zoe is the CEO of the Markle Foundation. She has held that role since 1998, and under her leadership, the foundation has really focused considerably on this exact issue, and I know she's partnered with Governor Hickenlooper and other governors here in public-private partnerships to invest in successful job training and apprenticeship programs. Prior to that, Zoe had an incredibly successful career as a lawyer and in government. She's a friend and a leader. I'm an admirer. And I think she's just the perfect person with the perfect background to partner with us governors to take a leadership role in apprenticeships. So. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be with you at your hosted NGA meeting, which I understand is a tremendous success. And a tremendous success for all of you. So I hope that we will contribute some ideas that you take away that are really actionable in your own states. And thank you very much to the NGA for having us here. You know, I think it's really important for all of us, and I've spent a lot of my life in public service as well as in the private sector. And I think it's really important for all of us who sit in a role where we're trying to address the pain that people are feeling in this country and trying to create the opportunity for them that we know exists, to look at this question of the digital economy from their vantage point. So how do people feel? People are excited. Most people have smartphones. Most people use Netflix or Amazon streaming and binge watch movies. So there's a lot of excitement about what the digital economy is bringing. But personally, most people feel that they don't see their place in it from an economic point of view. Most people don't understand what jobs to tell their kids to go after, what training to tell their kids to go after, what they themselves should be doing. We did a poll with Pew that showed that 87% of Americans, this is 1 month before the election when the country was so divided, 87% of Americans said that they need to get training throughout the course of their lifetime in order to succeed in a career. But they look at the institutions that serve them and they see our schools ending at 18 or 22. They see our financial aid and they think it's for young people. They go to an unemployment office or a workforce center and people aren't trained in understanding what the digital economy jobs look like. So they're talking about how to bring back jobs or how to get into a job that's highly competitive, but we're not able to fill 6 million jobs in this country. And each of us in our states could talk about the 100,000 construction jobs we can't fill today. If we get, you know, a great infrastructure bill, we're not going to have the welders who know how to use precision welding. We're not going to have the people who know how to use a robot to break down the old construction in order to create the new. So there's a great disjunction between what we've been telling people, which is go to college, get a 4-year degree, and you'll succeed, and what they actually need to succeed in the digital economy. We have not done people a service telling them if you haven't achieved a 4-year college degree, you're a failure. And that's how almost 70% of Americans see the world, because almost 70% of Americans do not have a 4-year college degree. So we need a much more diverse sense of possibilities for people. That's what we're talking about here with apprenticeships, which is a really critical and important aspect of that. But there's so many other ways that we can also create opportunity for people. You know, 100 years ago, when we moved from an agricultural economy to the industrial age, we invented the high school. I mean, you probably haven't thought about where'd the high school come from, why was it invented? It was invented at the state level to enable people to get the skills they needed, the training they needed, the understanding of the world to move from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy. And what we believe is going to be necessary to scale all these great efforts of apprenticeships or employer educator matching is going to be inventing a digital economy labor market. And I want to show you a film which is full of Coloradans. Thanks to Governor Hickenlooper, we've started this work in Colorado and it's really taken off. We now have almost 300 employers signed up, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Skillful, but then about what you can do in your own states. But first I want to show you a very short film which will give you a sense of what a digital economy labor market's all about. So if you could run the video, that'd be great.
America's really going through the largest change in its economy since the time of the Industrial Revolution. And so many Americans don't feel that they understand what their place is in this new economy.
There are 7.3 million fewer jobs in America today held by people with a high school diploma or less than there were in 1989. And in some ways, the single most important question for all of us in this country is, how do we move forward without leaving some people behind?
For decades, we've been telling people, get a college degree and you'll be able to compete for the growth jobs with higher incomes. Today, it's not necessary that that be the singular path that people take.
Skills aren't always measured by a diploma. They're measured by the experience that you gain and the type of training that you receive.
What I'm seeing and hearing is that there's a fear that jobs are going away and there's not enough opportunities out there, but we see that in the trade sector, there's been a huge increase in openings for employment, but there's not enough skilled labor to fill those roles.
In healthcare, people always assume there's only two people that work in the hospitals, and that's doctors and nurses, but you have a gamut of different occupations: cardiovascular technician, surge tech, IT, health information.
The real opportunity is to look to the middle of the graph, to the so-called middle-skilled jobs, and to equip more people to hold those kinds of middle-skilled jobs, and then to create more of those jobs.
So a skills-based labor market makes it possible for people to see career paths that they didn't realize were open to them before. We found people like a FedEx truck driver in her early 40s, and she doesn't know what the digital economy holds for her. And through online tools, she can see that she has a lot of the skills for a higher tech, higher paying job with very few additional hours of training.
We need to change hiring practices, which is part of what Skillful's doing. Working on the ground, meeting with businesses, showing them how to do more of a skills-focused hiring.
87% of Americans believe that skills training throughout one's lifetime is necessary in order to succeed.
We have a role. It's not just to sit back and hire people coming out of our college system or even our high schools. We need to do more training and apprenticeships.
People say, well, what if you train these people and they leave? And we say, well, what if you don't train them and they stay?
Employers have to do more. Those of us in the tech sector need to create tools that will help people do more. Educational institutions, governments, and frankly, most importantly, all of us have an individual responsibility to do more in terms of learning more.
So I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview. And Governor Hickenlooper, I hope you see a lot of your friends from Colorado there. We believe that this notion, which we've taken up in Skillful, enables employers to go after the workforce they need, enables job seekers to see where the jobs are, and educators to know what to train to. And so we've worked, as I said, we now have almost 300 employers signed up in Colorado. We've worked deeply with about 20 of them to develop the position descriptions on a skills basis. You know, in Colorado, and I'm sure this is true in your own states too, for an entry-level computer systems administration job, which has an annual income nationally of about $62,000 a year, in Colorado, 75% of those job postings require a bachelor's degree and are a barrier for anyone else to apply for those jobs, but only 45% of the incumbents have a bachelor's degree. So if we can make it easy, and particularly for small and mid-sized employers, to break down the barrier and to have the tools, which we do on Skillful.com, and we're bringing in tools like the curricula that Siemens is creating, there's enormous value out there to bring to employers to see who they might go after in the market that has the skills. But we also need to, and this is a place where you can have a big impact, we need to have the trainers, the community colleges, the boot camps, the four-year colleges as well, make transparent what skills people have developed when they go to those schools, so people get something of value along the way to the diploma, and so that they can go out into the labor market at different points and really think about learning as lifelong. You can help drive your community colleges and four-year colleges to think about their business model as a lifelong business model. That's a revenue generator for state systems. So we need to change those business models to match with the market. We need to work on workforce centers because they I bet you anything, if you look at your unemployment offices and workforce centers, you're going to find that they get no training on what the jobs look like and what employers are looking for. Or if that training exists, it's segmented into the economic development part, the business-facing part of these operations, rather than the job seeker-facing part of the operation. We also need to create a lot more transparency for job seekers about the fact that these opportunities are there, and governors can be great leaders on this whole issue we've talked about of people seeing themselves in these jobs. Most people do what their neighbor does or their parents have done in the past, and they don't even realize that they could be in these jobs. The female FedEx truck driver in our video is a real person in Colorado. She was worried she couldn't lift the boxes anymore. She didn't appreciate that to be a FedEx truck driver, she gets trained in a lot of digital economy skills, and those skills are transferable to an IT track career. So we would really encourage you, we would be very happy to work with you to think about how in your state do you create a new labor market ecosystem. Microsoft has just joined with us. They've invested $25 million in Skillful, in expanding in Colorado, going to other states, and also developing policy work at both the state and federal level. We need to make financial aid resources open and available. I could go through the, back through the things you could do on the points that I covered, but if you focus in your own state on creating a new skills-based labor market that works for the people in your state, you'll bring together your employers, your educators, your workforce centers, and job seekers will benefit. They will be the ultimate people who will benefit from this, but will grow our economies at the same time. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was terrific. I know we have a number of governors here who are engaged in some of this similar work, so I'd like to begin by asking Kentucky's Governor, Governor Bevin, to share with us some of your experiences.
Sure, I'll try to keep this brief and touch on a few things that we've implemented just recently. I've only been governor for a year and a half, and so I'll mention a few things that others can feel free. There's nothing really proprietary about any of these things. So much of what we learned, I was one of the governors, as others that you'll hear from in a moment, who had a chance to go and see Siemens, among others, in Germany. And it's impressive. The young man that we saw in this video, we met dozens of them in Germany. And their English was just impeccable, frankly, interestingly. But these were impressive young people who were on a track to a career that they felt good about. I think the real key is for us, as was noted by both of you, is to destigmatize this idea of not going immediately to a four-year degree. And to realize that, in fact, simply getting a four-year degree is not in and of itself necessarily the best track to having a fulfilled career. There's a man in Kentucky where all of the titanium ribs that are used in the Boeing Dreamliners are made in this little plant in Shelbyville, Kentucky, and there's a man who oversees that entire high-tech, very specialized fabrication process, who had, for 10 years after high school, didn't even go to college, and he's the head of that entire program for Boeing. He now has advanced degrees, but it was years later when he needed them that he decided to go back. In the interim, he had just learned skills in the very same types of programs that you all have described. So it was encouraging. I just want to touch on a couple things that we've done. First of all, we're funding now in Kentucky dual credit at the high school level, where we're funding it in our budget, so that high school seniors and juniors and moving on down as the years go on will be able to take college, post-secondary level certification training and or academic training while still getting credit in high school. That's one thing that's going to have a profound impact. We're putting seeds in the ground now. In just even last year, we saw a 72% increase in the number of young people taking part. So I'm confident that that will produce results. We put a $100 million workforce development initiative in place over 2 years, $100 million. To receive it, one of the things, and I would encourage all you governors, if you do something like this, don't allow it to get hijacked politically by your legislators, because what some of them wanted to do is make sure that some of the money went to this district and some went to this part of the state and some went to this, and don't allow it to just be the best ideas. We said we want to see 3 applicants work together to apply for this money: the business community, the local high school, and the local post-secondary institution have got to meet together, work together, and come up with a joint application. When that type of dialogue starts, good things are going to happen in your communities. And so we had $540 million worth of application for the $100 million. Obviously, we could only choose 20%. And so we chose the best of those. But some of those who came up with ideas and received nothing from the state decided to pursue their ideas anyway because they were so enthused by the dialogue that they'd had. And we, in result of this, have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars worth of workforce development as a result of our willingness to put $100 million worth of taxpayer money up. We focused not on simply providing, in some states, and I applaud you who've done it and have been able to afford to do it, who provide free post-secondary education for 2 years, say, for anybody to study anything. We focused on 5 key areas, the 5 areas where, frankly, we have the greatest number of needs, the most unfilled jobs. And there are things like logistics and construction and IT and healthcare, et cetera. And these are areas where there's open jobs right now, thousands. And so we, the state, said we'll come alongside, and for anyone, regardless of age, if they've never attained at least an associate's level degree in their life, they can come along into this program, and we, the state, will make them whole on any cost associated with attaining 2 years' worth of certification and or degree in those areas where there is a job waiting for someone with at least 2 years' worth of work at the other end. Not complicated, but this will change the dynamic as well for people. You talked about journeyman. We have a program, apprenticeships, I won't go into because a lot of us are starting apprenticeship programs and we're focusing on it like we never have before, but we're looking for new ways to do it. We have a program called Justice to Journeyman. Every single one of our states has a literally captive audience of people capable of being trained. And we have in Kentucky any number of folks, 25,000 folks that are incarcerated. 95% of all the people in all of our jails are going to get out. 95% of them are getting out. What are they going to do when they get out? What skills will they have? And to become a journeyman, you need 540 hours worth of classrooms time. Well, you know where everyone's going to be when they're in jail. You know where they're going to be at 7:30 in the morning. And so they're starting their training now in 7 of our institutions, 3 of our juvenile detention centers, and 4 of our regular prisons. We're starting this Justice to Journeyman program where they can start getting training now while they're in prison on the educational side. We're moving in Kentucky to 100% outcomes-based funding. This is something I pushed for when I ran. I got a lot of resistance, as you would imagine, from universities. But our post-secondary education system with taxpayer money is going to be 100% outcomes-based funding. And it's going to be driven by outcomes that, frankly, generate the very things that our marketplace wants. Those are just a few of the things. And the last thing I'll comment on, and this is a question I would say to those in our Congress, we've got to rethink, I believe, the types of ideas we have about what young people can or cannot do. Some of the age restrictions we have on kids in high school being able to go into businesses and to learn, I think have got to be rethought. And I think if we do some of these things, these are just a handful of the things that we're doing. I mean, there's nothing proprietary about them or even that particularly brilliant. Some of them are ideas we've taken from others. There are other states that are doing good things. But I mention these only to say that we all have got to do this. And I'm grateful for the fact that companies like Siemens are leading on this front. I mean, you truly are, and it is inspiring to states like us that are looking for models that we can replicate. So thank you both for being here. Thanks for your passion for this. And the same issue we have in Kentucky is that it's shared by every governor that I know of. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Go ahead, Judy.
Thank you, Governor. And I think what's key is none of this is proprietary. And even in industry, we feel the same way. We will all benefit by there being more available skills. And so what we've done with working with Alcoa, Dow, and the National Association of Manufacturers and the Department of Labor is we've created a playbook that any company, small or large, can use. It's available online at the Department of Labor as well as the National Association of Manufacturers if you want to start an apprentice program. It's about 130-some pages of how to. And people can tailor it, and it can be used anywhere. We all, I think, want this to succeed. We all need it to succeed for our economy, and because of that, we're happy to share that, lessons learned, and anything we can with any state.
I appreciate you offering that. You know, you mentioned earlier the stigma, and I agree with that, and I think governors have a particular role to help reduce the stigma, but it has to be done on the corporate side as well, which is to say, it's one thing to say you believe in competency-based hiring, and then you go back and you just do the resume tracking and look for the 4-year degree. You need a real commitment to that sort of hiring, and that's why your leadership is so extraordinary. I need to keep us moving because we're a little bit behind. So Governor Hickenlooper, could you share with us what's going on in Colorado?
Sure. I want to thank both these women for not just coming here today, but all the work you've done, and certainly the two sides you're presenting, apprenticeships and the skills-based technology platform, fit together so beautifully and allow us to imagine a cradle to grave arc by which kids, but ultimately all age people take responsibility for their own careers. One of the things that we found is, as we've gone into this over the last several years, we can, on a state basis, choose to go through all of our job openings and eliminate the BA requirement where we can. And it's amazing, if you go through, it's so easy, and we've all done it, just to say, all right, these jobs all require a BA, when in essence, many of them don't. And I think once we do that, it makes it a lot easier to reach out to our business community. The second point is, as both of these women are describing, you can't do either of these programs without organizing the business community. And that in itself is a muscle that we don't often use enough. And certainly with the apprenticeships, the business community, each industry comes together and helps design the curriculum. So these kids go work for a couple days a week, but then they also go to a community college or a workforce training center, and what they're learning is really designed to make them successful at the place where they're working. Think about how many 17 and 18-year-old kids normally are bored silly, right? 1/3 of our kids go to college, the other 2/3 aren't going to college. They spend their junior and senior years kind of twiddling their thumbs. Most, shouldn't say I'm making gross generalizations, but many of them are bored silly. This allows them to be engaged. The third thing, when you organize a business community, you begin to get to the point, and we're just really embracing this, how are we going to make the assessments, if we're talking about a skills-based approach to an arc, a lifetime of learning, how do we measure and know that kids have taken a training program, they have a certificate of some sort, that they really are competent, they have a competency in these various skills that allows businesses to look at a website like skillful.com and really have a good sense of what they can do. And I think everybody should go out and look at not just the governors, but as many people as possible. Microsoft has a great program out there that is pretty amazing and gives you a picture of what's possible in the future. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I know we're out of time. But I do, again, want to thank both of these women for being here, but also what you guys are bringing to this. It's going to transform this country in real time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Governor Fallin.
Well, I think this is one of the most transformational things we can do for our nation, is to fill the middle skills gap, to prepare our young folks, our adults, for careers and skills that are relevant to today's society and looking out towards the future. One of the things I think all of us governors hear is that employers have jobs that they can't fill, and then we all have friends that have someone that has a child that graduated from high school or maybe graduated from college and they can't find a job. Or there may be an adult our age that says, hey, something's changed in my life and I can't find a job, but yet we know there are tens of thousands of jobs that are open out there. And so I am so excited about the apprenticeship programs that we saw in Germany and Switzerland, and I think it is critical for our competitiveness as a nation that we really rethink how we do education and training to match the skills that are needed for today's workforce. One of the favorite things I like to say when I talk to businesses is it's not your grandfather's manufacturing facility anymore. Everything's high tech. You need to know something about applications and coding and programming, and I can't think of hardly any businesses that don't have something to do with a computer of some sort or some type of software. And if we don't transform our learning systems in our nation to be relevant to the skills we're going to need, we're going to fall behind as a nation. But the thing I found very intriguing about going and seeing the workforce programs at Siemens and the other companies that we went to see in Germany and Switzerland is, as we talk to these students who are going to class 2 days a week, going to work 3 days a week, they all were excited. And I asked these students, would you rather go to school 5 days a week taking classes, or would you rather do this 3-day work program in 2 days in classes. All of them that we talked to, Lieutenant Governor, or Governor, sorry, we were Lieutenant Governors together a long time ago, thinking about our past. We elevated ourselves, didn't we? The theory. We may wish to go back. But it's your job, right? Yeah. But all the students told us that they love going to work because they saw the relevancy of making money. They make money, they learn soft skills, they learn to show up, go to work, they can see why they're learning something, how it could pay off in the future, they could actually get a job and make some money. But I agree with what you guys said a few moments ago about the stigma of talking to parents and talking to students, that there is a great job to be had with a good salary and a good career path, and looking at our male skills gap and transforming more of our students over to what I call dual education, earn and learn, I think is what we called it, in type of system that we've seen throughout Europe. The other thing I found was very intriguing is I talked to the adults around the apprenticeship programs and just citizens within those communities. I would say, tell me about your drug problems, because we've had a lot of discussion about opioid abuse and prescription drug abuse, and I would say, tell me about your teen pregnancy problems, which are big issues in America. And they said, well, I don't really have problems with that, which I found intriguing, because I think the reason why they don't have big problems with those things is because these young students at 15, 16 are seeing why it's relevant to get a skill, get a job, make money, there's a career path ahead, and they're staying out of trouble and not having some of the societal issues that we have in America, where with our high school students, we give them a diploma and we say, best of luck, hope it works out. Maybe you can find something, maybe not. But in the apprenticeship programs, they actually get a certificate and some type of work skill says you're qualified. Employers know that if they've been certified, that they're qualified if they hire one of those types of students. And the other thing we heard, governors, is that the students would typically stay on with whatever company they were getting the apprenticeship with, and the employers found a ready-made workforce with those employees because they had a chance to try them out to see if they were going to make it. The other thing I found was intriguing, and one of the students I talked to in our state, in Oklahoma, that was going through an apprenticeship, he was going through a dentistry apprenticeship, and I asked him how he liked it, and said, I don't. I said, that's fine, because if you don't like it, you need to find that out now before you waste your time going through a program, spending a lot of money in something that you don't like to do, and that way you can learn something else and move on. So I think it's very exciting that we have a movement in our nation, a discussion in our nation about apprenticeships, about education, relevancy, bringing together our employers and our education institutions to actually have a conversation about what type of skills do you need. And to get on to what Governor Bevins said, I think there's great room for single moms, for people coming to our corrections facilities, for those that are disabled, for veterans coming out of our military service to go through these apprenticeship programs too, even as adults, and learn skill sets that will be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to move on to Governor Dugart and then Governor Bullock.
Thank you. Well, first let me add my thanks to Judy Marks and Siemens and the Markle Foundation. Judy especially for helping the governors get a chance to see things in Europe and Germany and Switzerland. It was really an eye-opener for me. If you look at the Center for Education in the Workforce data at Georgetown University, I recommend the governors take a look at that website. They really have some eye-opening data, eye-opening for me. I went back to our states, and after visiting Colorado and seeing some of the data that Governor Hickenlooper and his team put together on Colorado young people, I looked at that same data with respect to South Dakota young people. And let me tell you what I found. Number one, if you go back 10 years ago, looking at the class that graduated in 2016 for data we had, if you picked 100 ninth graders who entered high school at that time, 4 years later, about 77% had graduated. Now today we're doing a little better, about 80%, but I'll venture to say that's true in most of our states, that about 20% of your high schoolers are dropping out before they reach graduation. So that's a group that we're losing. Then let's assume those remaining 80 do go on to some post-secondary education. How important is that? Well, I'll tell you how important it is. this Center for Education and Workforce identified when the recession came along, of course, we knew jobs were lost in all of our states. South Dakota lost jobs. Most of us, the nation as a whole, has regained all those jobs and then some. And most states, at the state level, that's true. It's true in South Dakota. We've regained those jobs and then some. But if you look at the nature of the person who has regained a job, when the recession began and then at the bottom of the trough, at the end of the recession, those with a high school diploma or less lost 6.2 million jobs. And then now the nation has regained 11 million some jobs since then. How many of those jobs went to high school diploma holders or high school dropouts? 80,000. So if you were a high school diploma holder or a high school dropout and you lost your job during the recession, what's happening is those people with bachelor's degree, they're taking them because employers are using the bachelor's degree as a way to screen. So that's one problem that we've seen. But it encourages us to recognize and urge to our young people how important it is to complete high school and get some post-secondary training of some kind. So that kind of data can really bring people up and get their attention because it makes people realize, I've got to do this. So in South Dakota, what we've done is we've done dual credit, much like Governor Bevin talked about. That's been a tremendous success. If you're not using some of your state dollars to encourage high school students to take post-secondary credit while they're still in their high school years and get credit at both levels, you should be doing that. That's been a tremendous success. We also offered full ride scholarships to technical schools. You know, a lot of our states have merit-based scholarships. Those are great. We also have need-based scholarship, but many of the needs-based scholarships don't encourage any particular pathway. And so imagine a needs-based scholar who enters a four-year degree, decides on an academic path which has no demand in the marketplace. We're like the alcoholic enabler. We get them all this debt that they need to incur on top of their scholarship, and they get a degree for which there is no job. And so I contend that our needs-based scholarships in particular, maybe our merit-based scholarships, should be offered contingent upon the student choosing a career path for which there is demand in the marketplace. Now, we want our students to chase their dreams, but maybe we need to open their eyes a little bit more urgently about what paths they're choosing and where they may end up with. I have also just recently, as a result of going to Europe and learning about all this apprenticeship, learning a little bit from Colorado, South Dakota, we gathered together a large group of our school superintendents and encouraged them to start integrating work-based learning opportunities, including formal apprenticeships at the high school level. And of course, we want to do that in our tech school level as well, but at the high school level too. And we're looking at waiving other curriculum that's driven toward a four-year college degree for all mentality and saying we're going to waive some of that for your students who want to pursue this apprenticeship training. And happily, our statute gives our Secretary of Education the power to do that. And so we don't have to go through all the fear that, oh, there's less rigor or somehow you're going to destroy our education system. And those are some strides we're taking in South Dakota. And I want to thank NGA and thank the Markle Foundation and Siemens and J.P. Morgan Chase for their support to this eye-opening experience for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. That was great. I'm going to give the last word to Governor Bullock.
Very much appreciate your all's commitment because I think it's, from my perspective as governors, that's how we're going to meet workforce shortage needs. We've raised the number of registered apprentices in our program by 30% in the last 4 years. I've followed from 2000 to today. 90% of those are still working in our state, which is so important for every parent. Average salary of an apprenticeship graduate is about $60,000 in Montana, which is significant. And I think we need to educate both the employers, government institutions, and the students. At the end of the day, so many people think of apprentices as just the trades, or there's 1,000 different apprenticeable fields. We have apprentices in phlebotomy now, to IT. When it comes to employers, this past legislative session passed a bill that if an employer hires an apprentice, we'll pay a $750 tax credit. If that's a veteran, we'll pay you $1,500. So we're getting the employers on board, but I think that we all have to, I had to work a lot with my two-year colleges to say, rethink their role. It isn't always about a two-year degree. It's about a professionally recognized credential. So I actually hired someone that works part at Department of Labor and the other at higher education to bridge that gap, and then also to say, let's give you credits for prior learning assessments to get you further along that path. But your continuing efforts also, just as Governor Dugard is now getting into the schools, I think that you as industry leaders, your voice, both to the manufacturing side or the business side, but also to the student side, to say, this is what, as a major employer, I need, and these are the skills that I need, can fundamentally help us shift this so that folks are thinking about, boy, I can make $60,000, and I can be earning money while I'm learning a skill that the employer is going to appreciate. So I think that this mind shift is happening all across the country, but your continuing leadership efforts can really help us as governors make that happen.
Thank you, Steve. We are out of time. I could give each of you 30 seconds to wrap up if you'd like to respond to what you've heard.
This is a great opportunity for all of us. We all have to come together. This is absolutely a state-led issue. We believe that this growth is grown locally, and all of you, we look forward, not just as Siemens, but I think I speak for a lot of industrial leaders. This is all about our future, and it's a mandate and a call to action, and we look forward to working with you.
I would conclude by saying that I really encourage you as governors to create that labor market in your state that brings together all the good one-off efforts, the apprenticeships or your efforts with community colleges, all the good one-off efforts, because without this system, without a labor market ecosystem, which we're happy to help you define, we have a playbook for it, everybody's got a playbook, but without that system, you won't be able to make this happen at scale. It won't work for people of all ages, and it won't continue. So I really encourage you to take all the fabulous work you're doing and think about what's the ecosystem of my state, what's the labor market that I want everyone to participate in. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you guys, fantastic discussion. Now we are going to move, I have a video that we'd like to show you. Related to all of this is making sure that people have skills that are relevant from the very earliest ages. And I'd like to introduce Reshma Saujani, the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code. I hope all of you have had a few minutes to see the girls who are out here. I know Prime Minister Trudeau spent about a half an hour yesterday with the girls. He was really into it. These are young women who are learning how to do computer coding to solve real-world problems. Here in Rhode Island, we are long on this. We're partnering with Microsoft and Girls Who Code to teach computer science in every public school, in every grade, starting in kindergarten. And it is a great thing. And I have to say, especially with three of us women here on stage, it is great to go down and see these girls. They are the face of the future. They are passionate, and they are solving these problems. So we're going to cue up the video, and then Reshma is going to join us on stage.
Wake up, work, and it's got me pretty stressed out to the point where I don't really eat like I should. I'm a fueler for a rental company.
In the wintertime, it's a lot more strenuous. He works, anywhere from 7 in the morning till 4 in the morning the next day, 7 days a week straight.
My work is dangerous. I'm basically driving a bomb around, a truck full of fuel.
My dad works a lot. He wakes up early and comes home late at night.
I wouldn't want Courtney to do what I do. I want her to go to college. I want her to have more opportunities in life. That's why I put Courtney in coding.
Okay, girls. The goal was really just trying to get them comfortable and not being afraid to make mistakes. Everybody listen to Courtney, please.
So to get the cat to pop out, I had to get it out. I had to just leave that there. It's difficult because you have to do this math with it.
And what's that math for?
To when you click to show where it will go.
Okay, so
Coding has taught me that nothing comes easy.
Girls Who Code is a lot more than just coding. We cover a lot of life skills, asking questions, working together, and teamwork.
Coding makes you be able to create stuff. I get to see what I create come to life.
I put her in these extracurricular activities so she can advance and have a career that's less labor intensive.
I think coding will give them, more opportunity for not only employment, but it's also sort of the next craft.
Courtney is the center of my world. I've had full custody of her since I was in the military. She's kept me strong and focused. My goal before I die is to just make sure that her life's as comfortable as can be, and I'm here as much as I can be for her.
I like to make stories, which means I would like to make them come to life. My dream is to probably work at Cartoon Network.
Which she always, when she puts her mind to it, she can do anything she wants.
Courtney's smart, she's kind, and she's a coder.
Thank you so much, Governor Raimondo, for inviting us to be here today. You're such a role model for so many girls in our country, so thank you. So, Carrollton, Ohio could be any town in America. In Carrollton, there's no Wi-Fi in the homes, little to no Wi-Fi in the schools. The county has been decimated by the heroin epidemic. But 40 girls, twice a week, meet in the local library to learn how to code, to get their shot at the middle class. Automation has transformed everything about the way we live and work. Jobs are not going to be done by machines and humans. They're going to be done by robots and computers. And if we were honest, this has created a lot of pain for Americans. But it's also created a tremendous opportunity. There are 500,000 jobs that are open in computing and technology. And these are jobs that are great. They pay a good wage, a great wage, $120,000 if you're a software programmer. The problem is that too many Americans don't have the skills to fill these jobs. Only 40,000 Americans graduated in computer science to fill those 500,000 jobs. This is an opportunity for many of you in your states and your constituents. I believe that the solution is girl power. Women, over the past 2 decades, we've been climbing. We're the majority in college, the majority in the labor force, 45% of all of America's breadwinners. You walk into any town, county, and parish, and you'll see women who are putting food on the table, who are paying the mortgage. The problem is that the number of women in computing has been declining. In the 1980s, if you walked into any computer science classroom in the country, it would pretty much have been half boys and half girls. If we were to Google a picture of Steve Jobs' original Macintosh team, there were more women on that team than any technology team today. It's a huge, huge loss for our country and for our families. So people often ask me, why? Why are women disappearing? And the first thing is culture. I know a lot of you sitting around the table have daughters. I actually met some of them last night. And you know what happens around 8th grade when all of a sudden, when they loved math and science, they now hate it. And it's because of the Barbie doll that says, I hate math, let's go shopping instead. It's because we can walk into a store and buy a t-shirt that says I'm allergic to algebra. It's because when I turn on the television or we open up a magazine, the image that we see of a computer programmer is a dude in a hoodie sitting in a basement somewhere, drinking a Red Bull and staring at a screen, right? And little girls look at him and they say, I don't just want to be him. I don't even want to be friends with him. Culture is having a huge effect on who our girls think that they can be when they grow up. The second thing, and I did a whole TED Talk on this. I spend a lot of time in the company of teenage girls, so I dissect them like they're a science experiment. And one of the things that I realize is, we're raising our girls to be perfect, and we're raising our boys to be brave. From a very young age, we teach our girls to smile pretty, play it safe, get all A's. We teach our boys to crawl to the top of the monkey bars and just jump off head first. And so by the time they're adults, they're risk takers. They say in Silicon Valley, you can't even get funding unless you've had 2 startups. My 2.5-year-old son is here, and I'm sure some of you have seen him. He was crying for his selfie with Justin Trudeau yesterday. And I often look at his swim class, and it's half boys and half girls. And when the girls are learning how to swim, all the parents are like, it's okay, honey. You don't have to get your feet wet. Don't be scared. And with the boys, they're like pushing them in the deep end, the moms and the dads at 6 months, because they're teaching them how to be men, how to be fearless, how to be risk takers. And we are protecting our girls. We're coddling them. We're making them afraid of critical feedback. And coding is a huge part in teaching them how to be imperfect. So in 2012, the non-coder decided to do something about it. And I started an organization called Girls Who Code, and we started with 20 girls in New York City, and I've taught 40,000 girls how to code in all of our 50 states through free summer immersion programs and clubs. And I do this work I'll admit, I'm a feminist with a capital F, but I do this work because I believe in the economic opportunity of women, and I believe that when you teach girls to code, they will change the world. And I see this every day. I see it in Korea, who was 5 years old when her daddy got diagnosed with cancer. So she built an algorithm to help detect whether a cancer is benign or malignant, so she could save her father's life. I see it in Lucy and Maya, 2 11-year-olds in New Jersey, who were watching CNN one day and saw that kids were dying because of lead poisoning, and so decided to build an app to help do something about it. I see it in Jasmine, whose mother works at Burger King, single mom, 4 brothers and sisters. She built an app called Wacky Words to make sure that every child has a chance to go to college and learn SAT words. I hope all of you had a chance to go downstairs yesterday and see these 30 girls from Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey start solving the problems of today and tomorrow. We had a group of girls who built an app on cybersecurity for senior citizens because far too many of their aunts and uncles had been hacked. We had a group of girls come all the way from a homeless shelter in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and they built a website to make sure that underemployed women have the opportunity to get jobs. We had a team from the Northeast come here to do something about infrastructure, and they built an application to negotiate traffic because far too many of them were late for school. These girls are our future. And when I look in your eyes, I see that same look that I saw in Courtney's father's eyes. You'd do anything for your girls, and you'd probably do anything for your constituents who are girls. And when it comes to computer science education, we've made progress. Governor Hutchinson, you've done tremendous work. Governor Raimondo's done amazing work. Governor Reynolds, we're so proud of what we're doing with you. And today, 1 out of 4 schools offers computer science. But I'm on the stage today to talk truth to power. And the reality is we are failing our girls. Your schools are failing our girls. And you don't have to trust me. Go get the data. Fewer than 1 out of 5 girls of students in your computer science classes are girls. And that's not good enough for me, and it shouldn't be good enough for you. As you continue to lead on this issue and bring computer science to every classroom, please track the data. Don't ever take your eyes off gender. We also have an opportunity together to make sure that we get every single school a Girls Who Code club. We know that after-school programs for girls will increase the likelihood that they will sign up for one of your computer science classes. 75% of our girls, because they did a Girls Who Code club, are now learning computer science in the daytime. We can do this. Look, I'm not a coder. I know most of you aren't, besides I know you, the governor of Puerto Rico, has had some experience in computer science, but you don't need to be technical to be a leader on this issue, and I'm living proof of that. This is a problem that we can solve, and it's up to you. The future of our girls is in each and every one of your hands, and I want to create the next generation of powerful female leaders, and I know you do too. So I hope you'll join me in this movement. Thank you so much.
Please remain seated. We'll be moving into our next session immediately.
A governor is the CEO of his or her state, the leader in charge of making sure the economy grows, working with the legislature to move the state forward, and providing the leadership to deliver effective and efficient services to constituents. But if a tornado or a wildfire rips through your state, or other catastrophe like a mass shooting happens, day-to-day governance can come to a halt. Crises require an immediate shift in priorities, and of course, by their very nature, they happen unexpectedly. While most crises will be handled at the state and local level, incidents like widespread power outages, industrial fires, and hazardous materials spills will require a presidential disaster declaration and will attract worldwide attention to a state. How a governor addresses a crisis, be it large or small, is critical and will have tremendous implications for the citizens of their states and the future of their governorship.
Perfect example for Washington.
The worst is still coming. So keep yourself safe and use common sense.
We're dealing with unprecedented circumstances here. I mean, we're talking about 6 or 7 feet of snow in 14 days.
The waters are going to continue to rise in many areas, and so this is no time to let the guard down.
And with this unprecedented snowfall, we've been moving aggressively to access resources from around the region to support our cities and towns. Again, I ask that everyone who's able to please help out and shovel our sidewalks and our fire hydrants.
The immediate need is to restore calm and peace to the city, make people feel safe. We're going to make sure that we get Baltimore back on track.
As your governor, I call on each of us as Oregonians and as Americans to end gun violence now.
I am extremely encouraged by the amount of cooperation we have gotten from people.
As chief executives, governors take their duties seriously to ensure their state runs smoothly, both in times of relative stability and in times of crisis. NGA is a key resource that can help governors and their teams prepare to weather the day-to-day and the extraordinary.
That's a helpful reminder of all of our responsibilities, and it certainly reminded me of some governors that have done extraordinary work and provided incredible leadership during times of crisis. As chair of the NGA's Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee, I'm honored to chair today's session, Preparing the Extreme, Building Resilient Communities. As you know, our committee vice chair, Governor Kate Brown of Oregon, could not be with us today, but we are honored to have my good friend, Governor John Bel Edwards, to fill in for her. Governor, welcome. He is my neighbor. He's a great colleague, despite a few aggravations in SEC sports. Thank you for joining us today, and we have an important agenda, so we'll get to it. We have, as will be introduced shortly, the director of FEMA and Michael Berkowitz, 100 Resilient Cities. But I want to just preface the remarks by saying, as you could see from the video, that virtually every state gets hit at one time or another by a catastrophe, a natural disaster. In Arkansas, most recently, we've had flooding. And if Missouri would just contain their water, we'd be a lot better off. But water flows, and we've had flooding in Arkansas. 44 counties were designated as federal disaster areas, most recently in Arkansas, as a result of the flooding problems. I did want to mention, anytime you have a natural disaster, emergency communication is one of the critical areas, and calling upon my experience at Homeland Security, I understand the importance of that. And I just wanted to remind the governors that we have 90 days after the submission of the plan from FirstNet to either opt in or opt out. I made the decision, announced it this week, that we opted in for the FirstNet initiative representing Arkansas, and I just wanted to remind the governors of their responsibility in that regard. But the early presence of each of you on site is important, but I've learned when it comes to our flooding in Arkansas, the follow-up is just as critical. And I want to express my appreciation to FEMA for their early work and assessments and making the judgments as to what qualifies and the assistance that's provided. But I'm following up with our levee system. Levees can be operated by the Corps of Engineers. They could be privately operated or publicly operated, and the coordination of that levee system, if it is not coordinated well, can lead to even more flooding or flooding in unintended areas and great disputes. So that's a follow-up item that we have. And so it's my hope today that FEMA is going to educate us on all of this, as well as our other speaker, and that I know we'll have a good dialogue with everyone as they ask questions. Governor Edwards, I know that you'll have some things to add, and I welcome you as you introduce these speakers as well.
Thank you, Governor Hutchinson, and it's a pleasure to be here, and probably not as pretty as the governor from Oregon, but I'm going to do the best that I can. In Louisiana, we've been challenged a lot and often, and you all know about Hurricane Katrina, and certainly that was the biggest single challenge, but we've been challenged just about every year since then, and so resiliency, mitigation strategies around flooding, incredibly important, and as I mentioned, we have more experience than we would like in this area. What we've learned is you can't wait for the federal government, even though you want to have a good partnership, and we've been able to achieve good partnerships, you simply can't wait for them to provide the answers to the challenges associated with severe flooding. But relationships do matter, and I encourage all the governors to get to know personally their federal coordinating officer at FEMA, the regional administrator, and certainly Administrator Brock Long. Since I assumed office in January of 2016, Louisiana has received 4 separate declarations, and 57 of our 64 parishes have been declared major federal disasters. Some of that from tornadoes, but mostly from flooding. Currently, what I can tell you is there is a glaring gap between the immediate disaster mass sheltering operations and the long-term recovery housing options, and which is why Sheltering and Temporary Essential Power, which is known as STEP, was an attempt by FEMA to fill this gap by creating a program that actually doesn't fit within the confines of the Stafford Act and subsequent federal regulations. So the state, working with the STEP guidelines, developed the Shelter at Home program after the August 2016 flood. This program provides minimal repairs, temporary repairs, simply to make a home habitable, safe, and secure, so that you don't have entire communities who are depopulating and moving elsewhere, which is something that we did experience with Hurricane Katrina. The shelter at home purchased the state and its residents' resiliency. Even if the residents didn't immediately begin to live in their home, the home didn't suffer from mold infestation and become otherwise abandoned later on, so that they were able to return home. I can tell you that we're continuing to work with FEMA to improve the program, and we've recommended to make it permanent, because if we can make it permanent, you can actually have contracts before the disasters hit, and you can negotiate those contracts, you can get a better price, and that saves time, effort, and energy after the storm when you have to sit down with FEMA to negotiate the parameters of that program, then go out to request for proposals and receive bids and award the contract. You'll be able to get to that much faster. The other thing that I would encourage FEMA to do, and I know that Administrator Brock Long is working on this, is the manufactured housing units where they're available in state, because you have a manufacturer in state or because you have significant inventories, that they be able to, that the states be able to purchase and then be reimbursed from FEMA in accordance with strict guidelines, I know. So we've got lots of challenges around resiliency in a state that suffers from coastal erosion, and we need more resources to direct at restoration and protection activities. So resiliency is a huge issue for us in Louisiana. And I had a lot more remarks planned, but I'm going to stop here because I know that we have to get to our guests. And I want to introduce, and we're very proud to have with us today, Administrator Brock Long, who is the administrator of FEMA. And I do want to acknowledge that you have, we know that you have a hard stop at noon. So I want to make sure that the other folks here know that as well. And then Michael Berkowitz, president of 100 Resilient Cities. And I can tell you that both of you in the state of Louisiana and your agencies, your entities have made a tremendous difference for my citizens. And so I just want to thank you very much for that, and thank you for being here. And the program is now yours.
All right. Thank you, Governors. It's truly an honor to be here. It's an honor to serve the nation in this capacity. And I'm a diplomat by nature, and one thing that you will get from me is working through the issues that I want to organize FEMA in a manner that helps you achieve your preparedness, response, and recovery goals, as well as mitigation. It is a partnership. If there's a failure at any one of the levels, whether it's local, state, or federal levels, I believe that we fail together, and we can't afford for that to happen. And so we have to design programs in a manner that does increase resiliency. FEMA is incredibly active. Even though we're not in the news very much right now, we are actually working 24 different disasters in 18 states. We have 4 or 5 more disasters that are actually in queue where we're conducting PDAs, and maybe some of your states as well, that we're trying to expedite those because, as I said on Thursday morning, I believe that governors should, we should render a quick decision as fast as we can to let you know what type of assistance is available or not. Regarding resilience, what scares me the most is I don't believe that we've built a true culture of preparedness within our citizens. I believe in what I call hazard amnesia, okay? We've had some bad disasters. We've had Sandy, we've had Matthew, we've had flooding. But one of the things that keeps me up at night is this nation has not seen the devastation of a major landfalling hurricane since 2005. You know, so sometimes I think we forget the worst. We have not seen a devastating earthquake in some time, and I go to sleep with that every night. So FEMA can't do this alone. We are a partner with your states. I have to understand the gaps that each of you faces and how we can meet in the middle, how we can help you to overcome those gaps through pre-disaster funding, or how we maximize disaster recovery funding when it becomes in your state. Because what I don't want to do is come into your state, set up joint field offices, spend a lot of money, and repeat the cycle over and over and over again. Hopefully, the experience with FEMA is positive and we leave you better and stronger for the next time that you have to face it. Achieving resiliency is a partnership. I look at resiliency in two different pots. There's the citizen, and then there's the public infrastructure side, okay? On the public infrastructure side, it's amazing to me to look that FEMA on average, puts out about $8 billion a year in recovery funding to rebuild after the disaster. How do we get that money up front? How do we put that money up front is the question that I ask. So there was a period between 2011 and 2014 where GAO report found that FEMA put out $3.2 billion in post-disaster mitigation funding in that 3-year period. During the same time frame, we were able to cough up $222 million on the pre-disaster side. It's flip-flopped. It should be flip-flopped. It's backwards. And it's not just as easy. If I could have been sworn in and signed a document within an hour that said we're going to move the post-disaster mitigation funding to the front side, I would have done it right off the bat. I would have put it up there because I do believe that pre-disaster mitigation is the key to reducing future disaster costs. Let's invest now, and let's put it forward. It can't just be FEMA funding alone. It's got to be priority in state budgets as well as local budgets as well. And I know, having served as a cabinet-level director for the Alabama Emergency Management Agency working under Governor Bob Riley, I understand the demands on state budgets and general funds and the cutbacks. I understand that's hard. I get that. But I do believe we have to focus on the pre-disaster. I have a tough job ahead of me. I need your help, helping us understand how to navigate that. It will require the help of Congress to be able to move some of that funding to the front side. When it comes to citizens, as I said earlier, I'm not sure that our Be Ready programs have actually hit the mark. You know, something that's very sensitive and something to talk about is I believe that asset poverty, not poverty, asset poverty, your ability to put your hand on cash right now, $500, the majority of Americans can't do it. And they can't overcome the simple medical emergency or activate insurance or, basically absorb the cost of having to evacuate, the fuel cost. And many of our campaigns are saying, go out, be ready, buy all this supplies for the next 3 days. That's important, but it may be an unrealistic ask in many communities right now. And I think we have to rethink that and form different partnerships with the Department of Education and others and train people to have their own rainy day fund. The other thing that we have to look at is we've called our citizens disaster victims, we've called them disaster survivors. I look at our citizens as the true first responder. A majority of time, FEMA is not a first response agency. As governors, you realize we don't roll in, we're not there right after the disaster. It takes time for us to come into place, and there's a whole process that takes place. But if you look at cyber attacks, if you look at active shooter, in Alabama, after a tornado hits, your neighbor was most likely the first one to do search and rescue. And so we have to think about the way we train our citizens and refocus these programs to give them life-saving skills. Come back to CPR, how to shut off the water valves to your homes. How can they do simple search and rescue in their communities after they face these disasters? I think we have to take a comprehensive look at what we're asking citizens to do, but empower them to be a part of that response. Get them included in our training and exercise as well. In closing, I'm gonna keep it there. On the housing side, Governor Edwards hit the nail on the head. We only have so much capability that we can bring down, and it is my job to coordinate the firepower of the federal government down through you governors, ultimately to the incident command level. That's my job. We only have so much that we can bring to the table. For example, in housing, there's only so many manufactured homes that are available right now, and it takes a certain amount of time to get many of them built. So how do we do things smarter from the standpoint of how do we make sure that we implement proper rapid repairs programs or STEP programs, as the good governor talked about? How do we do that, keep people in their homes without having to bring in manufactured housing or temporary housing onto those locations? Are we maximizing economy sharing platforms such as Airbnb? If you can rent them, that's the best thing to do. And in many cases, when rural areas are hit, the only option is a manufactured home, and I get that. But how can each one of the states, I believe it's my time to give guidance on the pre-event contracts. I believe that you guys can control your own destiny a little bit more by setting up the right pre-event contracts, whether it's hiring firms to help you navigate disaster recovery cost, or whether it's setting up your own vendor-managed logistics systems. There's got to be private companies that do water every day in your states, signing MOUs with them to basically say, hey, can I have 100 truckloads of water at market price if we get hit, so that you're rolling forward the first 24, 48 hours of water until I can backfill the system on logistics, and let me reimburse you for that first 4,800 hours through the Stafford Act. So there are, I think we have to clearly say, here are some of the things that you can do as no-cost retainer contracts until they're turned on, to be a little more prepared and to help the system as we go forward in there. So I'm going to stop there. But one more thing, recovery is fragmented. It's incredibly fragmented in this country. There are studies out there where everybody is saying reduce the disaster costs, which I believe we can do that. And a lot of that is by reducing complexity. There's over 200 different policies that guide FEMA recovery alone, which is way too much. It's confusing. It leads to bad decisions. It leads to negative OIG reports. And it's tough for locals to keep up, local governments to keep up with all of that. The other thing is that FEMA's not the only one that's providing funding. There are numerous funds out there when it comes to disaster recovery. They come from HUD, they come from CDBG-DER funds, they come from SBA, there's economic injury loans, there's the Army Corps of Engineers that comes in. What are the big data systems that help governors understand how to formulate their recovery goals and maximize all that funding to do the greatest good when it comes down and it comes available? I don't think as a nation we have actually come together to do that. And I want to help. I want to figure out. I've got to stretch across our federal partners to figure out how we work in concert with one another, but also say, Governor Hutchinson, based on this disaster that you've had and the impacts that you're experiencing, here's the best way we would encourage you to help. But I don't know how Arkansas should recover better than you, but we've got to be able to figure out how to use that funding down. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor Hutchinson, Governor Edwards. Nice to be here, and Administrator Long. Thank you for your thoughtful remarks. I'm Michael Berkowitz. I'm the president of 100 Resilient Cities. We're a $164 million organization funded by the Rockefeller Foundation to build urban resilience in 100 cities around the world. We actually have 100 cities in 48 countries across 6 continents. So I greatly appreciate the ability to take a train a couple of hours here. The travel is certainly better. We're charged with helping cities build urban resilience to the social, economic, and physical challenges of the 21st century. And like the administrator, I'm here to talk about flooding and flood resilience. While conventional responses like hard infrastructure and emergency response are important to our efforts to limit flood impacts, those alone are not enough. Instead, I'm here to advocate for a more powerful and cost-effective approaches that improve the lives of city residents long before disaster strikes. I'm here to advocate for building resilience. And what do I mean when I say resilience? Because that is a word that gets tossed around a lot. It's the capacity to survive and thrive in the face of disaster. But don't just think about the sudden disasters, the shocks, the earthquake, hurricane, terrorism, tornadoes. Also think about the long-term, slow-burning disasters, long-term food, water, and energy shortages, high levels of crime and violence, aging infrastructure. Those can also impact cities. And I first learned the importance of resilience building while I was working at the Office of Emergency Management. I served as deputy commissioner in New York City between 1998 and 2005 under Mayors Giuliani and Bloomberg. And in that role, I spent a lot of the 90s preparing and tracking hurricanes and helping the city prepare for them. And then on 9/11, 2 planes flew into 2 buildings, and the world, New York, and our country were changed forever. Next came anthrax attacks, a plane crash in Queens, the 2003 blackout, the global financial crisis, and only then, in 2012, did we have a Hurricane Sandy. And New York survived and thrived through those incidents. And it's worth just pointing out that this week marks the 40th anniversary of the 1977 blackout in New York City. You know, we had a blackout in July of 1977, and the city was impacted by riots for the next several days afterwards. And you contrast that with what happened in 2003, and you understand how it's not just emergency response and infrastructure that determines whether or not a city, a state, or a country can survive in the face of shocks and stresses, but rather it's a much broader approach. And these experiences underscore an important insight that infrastructure and emergency response are important to prepare a city for the worst, but it's also critical to focus on robust, diversified economies, cohesive communities where neighbors check on neighbors, integrated leadership with strong stakeholders at the table. The same lesson can be drawn from Hurricane Katrina in Governor Edwards' state, which killed nearly 2,000 people, displaced hundreds of thousands of Americans, and cost nearly $150 billion. And to understand what went wrong, it's not enough to look at how warm the Gulf was, what the state of the infrastructure was, how big the storm was. Those are all important. But you also need to consider the local economy, the transportation systems, public health, civic leadership, political leadership. And looking at flooding in a vacuum would be to ignore those exacerbating factors. And the truth is, you rarely know what disaster will strike next and how it will play out. If you think you do, the chances are that you're fighting the last war. This is, you know, the all hazards preparedness that FEMA so appropriately espouses. The resilience mindset challenges us to look at issues in a comprehensive way, to commit to tackling multiple problems with each investment. It's a simple approach. Focus on building strength with every intervention and become better prepared for whatever happens next. And so how does resilience building work in practice? And to answer that question, I'm going to just share three quick real-world examples, and I'll start by talking a little bit more about New York City, my hometown. So New York is surrounded by water. It has nearly 700 miles of coastline alone, and rising tides and hurricanes have the potential to create flooding that could cripple the city, the region, and our national economy. And a traditional response to a threat like this would be to build a seawall. You know, you have engineers and planners, make some estimates, we have a few. We have a few visuals. You have engineers and planners calculate worst case scenarios, make some estimates, add some buffer, and pour concrete. But there's a better and more powerful way, and likely a cost-effective option. Building a wall might help New York survive this particular threat, but it would fail to strengthen the city more broadly. Why not address the threat of flooding while simultaneously tackling other challenges like dwindling public space and neighborhood isolation? Following Sandy, and in partnership with state and federal government, the city came up with a project called the Big U, and you can see it here. It's a ring of green infrastructure protecting Lower Manhattan that will run 10 continuous miles. It's not just a method of flood protection. Each of the sections provide innovative solutions to challenges facing the surrounding neighborhood. For example, new pedestrian paths incentivize exercise, combating obesity and other public health issues. Trees and other greenery mitigate the effects of the urban heat island, which makes Manhattan hotter than the surrounding areas. And new public spaces engage residents so that neighbors meet neighbors, which is something that you shouldn't take for granted in the big city. The Big U will protect New York City from flooding, but that's not all it will do. It will also strengthen the city socially and economically, connecting New Yorkers with one another, making the city stronger and more resilient no matter what the next crisis it faces next. The next example I want to share with you is about the work being done in Governor McAuliffe's home state of Virginia in Norfolk. It's this coastal city, which is famous for shipbuilding and the world's largest naval base, is perhaps one of the most flood-prone cities in the country. Norfolk is turning this challenge of rising sea level, river flooding, and land subsidence into an opportunity for economic development and community engagement. And led by Christine Morris, the city's Chief Resilience Officer, the city has heeded the gospel of resilience. Instead of just digging up historic creeks to channel floodwater, Norfolk is turning those creeks into gathering spaces for the public and real estate for new construction and much-needed housing. Norfolk isn't looking at flooding through a myopic lens. They're taking a more holistic approach. The city is tackling multiple issues at once, making the most of every dollar spent. And in doing so, they are poised to be stronger and more prepared for the future, no matter what comes next. This type of long-term, comprehensive thinking is resilience building at its best, and others are taking note. Last year, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, awarded $120 million to support projects laid out in Norfolk's resilience strategy. I believe those were the biggest grant the city ever received in its history. And the private sector is similarly enthusiastic. Moody's, the credit rating agency, published a paper last year on the Hampton Roads credit posture in the face of climate change. And the agency maintained strong credit ratings even in the face of this threat. And as surely every governor knows, accessing credit for investments in infrastructure and innovation is essential to building strong cities and a strong state. Building the resilient coastal city of the future isn't easy, but Norfolk is tackling its challenges head-on and is already reaping the benefits. There's one more example of resilience in action that I'd like to discuss today, and I would be remiss if I left this room without returning to New Orleans and the home state of Governor Edwards. As I alluded to earlier, New Orleans has learned important lessons about what it takes to overcome natural disasters and build a vibrant and resilient city that serves all its residents. One of the first cities to release a comprehensive resilience strategy, they did it on the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans has developed actionable plans on topics ranging from equity and energy to education and emergency planning. And I want to point out one more example of resilient flood approach here, and that's the first of its kind resilience district that the city is creating in the neighborhood of Gentilly, which was made famous by a photo taken right after Katrina of houses fully submerged. Gentilly is now undergoing a consolidated effort to reduce flood risk, slow land subsidence, and encourage neighborhood revitalization. And this is part of a new trend that we're seeing in progressive cities and states all over the world. They're moving away from thinking about the city as a funnel and trying to treat the city as a sponge. Instead of trying to get rid of the water through pipes and stormwater systems, Gentilly is building green infrastructure, and you can see it here, that will allow the water to be safely retained on site. This approach has multiple benefits. It slows subsidence by restoring some of the water table. It reduces the risk of catastrophic failure, and will create public space that serves the residents in both good times and bad. Put simply, New Orleans is learning to live with water rather than fight it, and is turning its greatest challenge into a valued asset. So I've talked about New York, Norfolk, and New Orleans, and all three we see as leaders in our network. But let me make a couple of direct asks to you as the governors. First, you should consider hiring a chief resilience officer for your state and empowering them with broad authority to cut across sectors and silos. Charging someone with this task will make it easier to realize the resilience dividend that I've been talking about. 2 states, and there are several others that are considering this, have already done so. Then, with every dollar you spend to address flooding, I'd encourage you to ask, how can this investment address multiple challenges to strengthen my state? And what collateral benefits can we reap? And this is not going to be easy, because the reason why we have sectors and silos is because transportation people want to talk to transportation people. Housing people want to talk to housing people. But if we continue to push this interdisciplinary approach, we will reap the benefits of resilience in the way that I'm talking about. Building resilience is recognizing that shocks and stresses are interconnected, that solutions should be too. Trying to solve single challenges with single solutions may have worked in the past, but today that approach is not only unwise but also untenable. Mitigating the threat of flooding in and of itself isn't enough. The focus needs to be on developing responses that build social and economic capital. So finally, one last thought, and I'm a cities person, so please forgive me for being so forward. But when you're thinking about how to solve problems at the state level, I urge you to look at your cities to see solutions being tested in real time. Just as states are famously known as laboratories of democracy for the federal government, you have the opportunity to treat cities as laboratories of innovation, practical solutions, and implementations for your state. Cities around the country are doing incredible work to ensure their residents remain safe and strong, to ensure their infrastructure works the way residents need it to, and to ensure that a changing climate and globalizing economy and urbanizing landscape will not catch them unprepared. We can face the challenges of our time and come out ahead. We can reduce the risks of disaster, from flooding to joblessness, to terrorism, to social strife. And we can translate the micro of cities to the macro of states, from a district in New Orleans to the entire United States. Together, working together, we can become more resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Administrator Long, and Mr. Berkowitz as well. Excellent presentations. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions, and let me kick it off, Administrator Long, with a couple of questions to you. In April of last year, 35 states responded to an inquiry from FEMA and reactions on the state deductible plan. So I'd like for you to update us on where that is in the rulemaking process and what your expectation is as to the outcome. And then if you could also comment, we had a discussion right before about the levies and the concern about it, and as to what you think we ought to be doing to have a better coordination of our levy system.
Sure. So the levy ones is pretty easy for me right now. I have to go work with our partners at the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure that our partnership is very clear, that we have clear roles and responsibilities, so that when we come out into a state, we're giving you the proper guidance and helping you understand what you're entitled to from the federal government to improve those or maintain those levies. The disaster deductible is interesting. So I understand the premise of the program and why FEMA initially went down this path. And basically the premise is good in my opinion, and it's, to me, it is how are state and locals increasing and emphasizing emergency management and disaster resiliency, and federal government is coming down and we're meeting in the middle, somewhere. The process of the PA disaster deductible program as currently written, I have some problems with. And I've heard very loud and clear that many states also have problems with its current form. So I have to go back and evaluate the PA deductible, but I don't want to basically start handing out policy that I know a majority of states are unhappy with. So I'm very aware of that issue.
Grateful for you taking a fresh look at that.
Thank you.
I've got a question for Michael Berkowitz. We are in Louisiana because of subsidence and sea level rise and coastal erosion. We're actually taking entire communities and relocating them, and we're starting that process now with an American Indian community. And even though it's going to be relatively small in terms of a large city like New Orleans or New York, I'm just wondering if what you were talking about in terms of resiliency and building it in, whether that has application for these small communities when we move them north and put them on higher ground, so that we can structure that in a way that achieves many of the things that you were talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. I think the way that relates to resilience is twofold. One is, to your point, that we do the right risk assessments to understand what the scenarios are going to be, so that we appropriately relocate communities to somewhere that's less vulnerable than where they came from, right? And that we take a long-term view. We're never going to be able to predict everything that happens, but we'll take a long-term view of what that means. The second is, I think the process that we go through in order to work with those communities is every bit as valuable as what the ultimate outcome is in a technical sense. If we do the right kind of stakeholder and community engagement, if we make sure that those communities are felt heard, that will make sure that the communities feel more empowered, bought into what's going on at the state and national level. And ultimately, that will make them better citizens and residents in the next disaster, whatever that happens to be, whether that's the BP oil spill, tornado, rainwater flooding, or a hurricane. And I just give you one very quick example of that from the project I talked about in New York, the Big U. The designers proposed some really innovative solutions around creating buildings with wet feet, that they would relocate people on the ground floors in public housing in very vulnerable areas in New York, build a new tower, make those buildings be able to withstand flooding and turn them into like community centers. That's classic sort of mitigation action, and from my eyes, it looked great as a technical solution. But the community didn't trust the city in order to follow through. And ultimately, that design was scrapped. And I think from a resilience standpoint that community feedback was listened to, was heard, even if it led to something that might not have been the most optimal technical solution, that will make that community more resilient because those community members feel a better sense of empowerment and alignment.
To governors, any questions? Governor McAuliffe.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank both the administrator for coming here today. And Michael, I can't thank you enough. I think it was January of 2016 that you and the Department of HUD gave Virginia $120 million to deal with our resiliency issues, and I just want to thank you for that. We've put it to great work. We have all new evacuation plans that I just announced last month to move people. Outside of Louisiana, Virginia is the second most vulnerable region in America, and you rightfully put up the largest naval base in the world. And I just got a report on my desk the other day with a 3-foot sea level rise, we'll lose $90 billion worth of infrastructure and real estate in the Hampton Roads region in Virginia. So I now have all the citizens, well, whether they believe in climate change or not, they are all aware of it today, and we are all working together. And it would not have happened without that HUD and that Rockefeller Foundation to really kickstart. So I want to thank you. And to the new FEMA administrator, I want to thank you. We have had a great relationship with Craig Fugate and FEMA. And it's just an outstanding organization. On behalf of all the governors, I just want to thank FEMA for their quick response and look forward to, I say look forward to working with you. I hope I don't have to work with you, but in the event we do, I just want to thank you for the efficiency.
We will be working together.
Thank you.
Well, I'll join in my thanks. Thanks for both of you being here. Great presentation. Let me Administrator, one of the things, understandably, is the focus is these large disasters that happen in large urban areas. And, of course, being so much of our inside the country is very rural areas, FEMA responds to a lot of relatively small disasters in terms of population. But all those more, at least equally significant to the citizens that live in a small town. And so one is, again, a thanks. I think FEMA has done a very good job doing that. I was interested in your comments about how you want to become more proactive in the dollars that FEMA has to spend, which I conceptually think is a wonderful idea. But we respond to the 100-year flood, to the tornadoes that we didn't know were coming, to the wildfires that were set or were hit by lightning strikes, that you have to respond to after the fact in some fashion. So is there better predictive analytics in terms of weather that you're looking at? How are you going to provide with that? If you said you would have done day one, switch that money around, which would have been significant. How do you respond to those things that still seem very difficult to predict, particularly in very rural areas?
So the rural governments face the toughest time because what typically happens, and having served in Alabama, 67 counties, several of these counties have less than 15,000 people in them. And in many cases, you would have tornadoes go through, wipe out significant infrastructure in a very rural area, but the state would not come close to its numeric indicators to ask for presidential assistance and the public assistance side. That's a tough situation, and I get it. The ask on that is, how many states actually have a rainy day fund to handle the PA and IA needs when FEMA assistance is not coming for that type of event? That's just an ask, and you know, work with your state directors to understand how something like that should be set up. And maybe we step away from the PA deductible and we start rewarding states for being able to prove that they have these systems set up to handle those hard case situations. The other thing is the disaster relief fund is where a majority of post-disaster funds come out of now for mitigation. So on average, we put out about $1 billion a year on average from the disaster relief fund. I can't just move that money. It would require a change in the Stafford Act that dictates that the funding where it is, and that's a lot of work ahead of us. This is a goal that we have to work together on to make sure that we can move that out. The other problem that we face for the increasing number of disasters is the Budget Control Act. I think we all understand why the Budget Control Act was passed, but for FEMA, it's a very negative thing. And what I mean by that is that every year, because of the formula that the Budget Control Act uses, it basically says Katrina and Sandy never happened. So every year, the average that gets funded goes lower and lower and lower, despite the fact that disasters are going up. So, you know, with that, one, we have to all make a stand that we're going to do pre-disaster mitigation from a whole community perspective, as Michael and I have both been putting forward. And two, that's something else that I've got to tackle that I recognize. So there's pressure to possibly start fighting wildfires on federal lands. There's cyber attacks. There's new hazards and different things that the Budget Control Act doesn't recognize. The Act doesn't recognize changing environments. The other thing is that I believe in climate variability as well. And what I mean by that is when I was first at FEMA, first came on board in FEMA, and I interviewed with FEMA on the morning of 9/11, and I watched a lot of changes, and I went through some of the best and tough times at FEMA. But I worked in the National Hurricane Center for basically 5 or 6 summers directly, you know, helping interpret forecast and basically turning that forecast into risk and vulnerabilities, helping governors make evacuation decisions or local governments do that. And I learned that through climate variability, there are also intrinsic cycles that increase and decrease periods of hurricane activity. There's El Nino that oscillates every 5 to 7 years, which means freak nor'easter snowstorms, tornadoes in areas that don't necessarily get them. There's also flooding. So there's a lot of educating to do about how to recognize the trends, the intrinsic cycles going around the globe at any given time that increase and decrease the periods of what we're seeing. And so I used to make the presentation that in 1995, because of a cycle called thermohaline circulation, the ocean's conveyor belt, we're getting ready to see an increased period of hurricane activity over the next 2 or 3 decades. And all that infrastructure that we put without building codes or proper land use planning, we're about to pay for that. And it's happening. And, you know, and so we're going to go through those cycles. There's a lot out of my control, but what I can control, I'm going to work hard on to be able to get it up front.
Thank you. Just to follow up, Administrator, again, we want to thank you for the work. To the extent it helps you save any money, we haven't had a hurricane in Wyoming for a long time, so you're good there.
Yeah. Governor Scott.
Administrator Long, I want to thank you for your leadership and assistance with our disaster. It was with Irene not too many years ago, and it was devastating for our state, but it was a great partnership that we were able to work with you in getting us through that. The struggle for us was in the recovery stage in implementation of some of the rules and regulations revolving around the replacement of infrastructure, the sizing of culverts, and the replacement of bridges, when it didn't make sense in some respects to rebuild in the same size. I think some of the rules dictated that it had to be rebuilt to the exact same standards as was there previous to the disaster. And I'm not sure that if you've changed that since then, But if you haven't, I'd implore you to look at that, because when you're looking to rebuild, certainly with all the frequency of storms and climate change being at the forefront, that we could use that flexibility in the future when we're rebuilding to make sure that the resiliency is real, that we're rebuilding for the future as well.
Sure. And I want to be able to design. So right now, currently, FEMA is working on what's called a PA re-engineering program. It's a new concept to streamline the services. And as I said earlier, we have nearly 200 policies that dictate how you do recovery. And that includes whether it's an environmental impact assessment or benefit cost analysis and many things. And in some cases, I think FEMA gets in the way of interpreting your contracts. All I want to make sure is that you followed your bid laws and not get in. And I want to provide you that maximum flexibility with what's there. So honestly, we've already started a Reduce the Complexity campaign inside FEMA now. And part of that is with the PA re-engineering program, to where we're really trying to try different things in different states to basically meet your need and make it as painless as possible. When you have to hire a consulting firm to navigate FEMA recovery, it's too complex.
Yeah, thank you for that. We did appreciate the good partnership, though.
I know that you've got a schedule to meet. We're grateful for each of yours participation and leadership on cities, resiliency, and even though Administrator Long did not bring us any good news for the future, talking about El Nino, we know that you're going to provide great leadership for our nation, and we're grateful for your service. So with that, I think we stand adjourned, unless Chairman McAuliffe, do you have any concluding words? Thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be having a lightning talk in this room in approximately 5 minutes. Thank you.
He's NGA staff too, so like when he's on conference calls.
He's like soothing.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are now beginning.
Good morning, everyone. As someone who spent his entire adult life in the private sector before I ran for governor, I'm thrilled and excited to introduce and hear from our next speaker. Steve Ballmer is best known for his incredibly successful career as the leader of Microsoft, serving for 14 years as the company's chief executive officer. When Steve started at Microsoft, they had just 30 employees and a few $100,000 in profit. When he left the company, they employed more than 100,000 people around the globe and were making $28 billion in profit and had created products that changed the world. He is a true American success story. Now, in addition to both of us spending time in the private sector, Steve and I have a few other things in common. We both started our careers at Procter & Gamble. We're both big sports fans, although his antics are more famous, and that's just the exposure you get when you are the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, many of you know I'm an avid proponent of American civics. And Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass the American Civics Act. That's where all of our high school seniors will have completed that test, so they'll be able to pass the same exam that new citizens to our country pass so that they understand our system of government. I'm thrilled when I see business leaders getting involved in public service. There are many people that I grew up with in business that want to somehow be involved, and I always say there are other ways to affect change in this country other than running for office. That's why I'm excited for all of us to hear about Steve's new initiative called USA Facts from the man himself. I was able to see him interviewed on NBC 2 mornings ago, and we have him today in person. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Steve Ballmer. They'll let you here for 1 minute, one second? Yeah. Okay, go get him.
Well, thanks to Governor Ducey. He understated the amount that we have in common. Yes, I started my career at Procter & Gamble, but I'm also almost a native of Toledo, Ohio. I grew up in North Toledo. It's called Detroit, Michigan for some. And I, too, am an ice cream guy. The governor may have started Cold Stone Creamery, but I'm a good customer and I love ice cream. I'm also a numbers guy. And I would say when I retired from Microsoft 3 years ago, one of the sources of, energy that I missed was kind of that numbers aspect. But shortly after I retired, my wife, who has been running our philanthropic activities for years, very focused in on child welfare issues, and now more broadly we're focused in on opportunities for children born in the U.S. Who may not have any other shot at the American dream. It's a real issue. But right after I retired, I couldn't get too focused on that. And she said, come on, let's get your brain engaged here on some of these issues of children, and I said, now come on. The government really does this. The government supports the old, the government supports the poor, children. Is there really a role for us other than paying our taxes? And she said, come on, dude, you can do better than that. And ultimately, I believe she was right, and that's why I'm very involved in our philanthropic activities. But it got me interested in government, if you will, by the numbers. I wanted to know, where do taxes come? Where do taxes go? How does the system work? What kind of outcomes does government really get for the dollars that go in? So I went to the internet and I started searching, and it's a nightmare. Try typing in something like government expenditures by function. Pretty reasonable query. You're going to get probably the top link, at least when I was doing this originally, comes from a blogger, an independent British guy, actually, top data about the US government, who happens to live in Seattle, Washington. And I said, come on, this can't be good enough. How do we do better? Well, as a former business person, I then said there must be something like the 10K report that all public companies are required to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Try typing in 10K for government. It turns out about a year later I found one. It is actually written by the Department of Treasury, but it's good, but it's not really all that you would want. So we started on this project, a group of us, to create a 10K for government. And oh, by the way, an annual report, which is easier to read than a 10K, and a website. And we said, what are the principles that we would ground in? First, only government data. 10K reports have to be the business's data. So we use 70 sources out of 120 government databases, 120 different government databases. Number two, you have to be factual and unbiased. No forecasts, no projections. I think that's very important. There are plenty of people who do forecasts, and I think that's where there's some sense of bias that comes into people's head, because nobody's quite sure what the basis is for forecasting. 10Ks have to be comprehensive. They have to talk about the whole business in a reasonable and responsible way. 10Ks have to provide context, historical and others. One of the things I think we find in a lot of political debate is people will snatch one number out of the air, and without context around the number, it's hard to know, is it big, is it small? If you say to the average citizen, $5 million, they'll say, whoa, huge number. If you say to the average governor $5 million, they'll say, well, yeah, important, but you know my budget is blah, blah, blah. And so I think it's important to provide that context. What would you want to talk about in a 10K for government? Businesses are kind of simple. They're about optimizing profit, and they have to build good products to get there. Government's actually about optimizing outcomes for citizens under certain financial constraints. So financials are not the optimization point, but particularly in state government, budgets do have to balance. Federal government gets a little trickier about that. As a business person, this is one bias I will admit to. I do think over time, budgets kind of have to balance. I don't understand anything else. But government is there to optimize outcomes for citizens. So in our 10K for government, we had to say, who are the citizens? Who is paying for the government and how? What is the government spending the money on? And then perhaps most importantly, what kind of outcomes are government getting? What are the missions of government and what are the outcomes? Well, to do that, you have to have some kind of comprehensible but comprehensive organizing structure for government. Businesses in their 10Ks have to break the business down into what are called segments. So if you're General Electric, well, let's say if you're Microsoft, you have a segment for Office software and for Windows software, and you have to explain the dynamics. We spent a lot of time thinking about how do you divide government into a set of manageable chunks. very, very kind of difficult to do. I had a list of 50, and then I had a list of 14, and gosh, I thought I was doing great in trying to make this stuff comprehensible. And then somebody came to us and said, look, one of the guys on the project, in a sense, the segments of government were given to us by the founders in the preamble to the Constitution. Government's mission is establishing justice and ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and securing these blessings for us and to ourselves and our posterity. Those are the segments of government. And you can ask, how are we doing in each case? Now, in some senses, you might think these are too broad. So in each of these categories, we broke them down one step further. Crime and disaster, consumer and employee safeguards, child safety. That's what justice is about. It's about physical protection, commercial protection, and a special case of child protection, where, in a sense, you're protecting a child almost from its guardians. And so you can see these are the segments that we chose to focus in on and what I might call the lines of business underneath them. We did write a 10K. 10Ks are kind of dry and hard to read. Ours for the U.S., before I say U.S. government, our 10K is for government in aggregate in the U.S. We combined state, local, and federal. Why? If you look at the average road in the state of Washington, I can't tell you who paid for it. Partly paid for the state, partly paid by the feds. If you visit schools in the state of Washington, partly paid locally, partly paid by the state, partly paid by the federal government, Title I dollars, et cetera. So if you're going to look at outcomes, you want to look at the combined spend against the outcome. And we did that in our 10K, in our more simplified annual report, as well as on our website. Maybe I'll give you just the briefest kind of view of what our website looks like. We'll go from our homepage to some of the big reports and give you just a sense. So here's our homepage. Click and we're into the big picture. First, revenues in blue. You can take a look at where the money comes from, even down to who pays for it. Here's corporate income taxes, how much state, how much local. You fan over to expenses and you see those segments. Promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity. Certain education, investment in human capital, is about securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. You can see total spend is $785 billion. It's split state and local. But we want to know more about this part of government. We give you breakouts, more on the spending, but the most interesting thing is what kind of outcomes do we get? You know, what are public school teacher salary, charter schools, overall school enrollment, dropout rates? I understand that there was just for the first time a standardization of the definition of dropout rates across states. These kinds of things are very important. The list goes on. We'll show you what the average reading proficiency is for kids in schools, SAT scores, and a variety of other things. That's kind of the framework of what we do. We launched, we've had 750,000 visitors from literally every state and all but 4 countries in the world: South Sudan, North Korea, Benin, we're missing one other. So there's a global interest in this kind of thing, even though our data is only focused in on the United States. But the interest has dropped off, frankly, from our initial launch. We get about 4,000 visitors a day. Some of that probably has to do with us needing to make this website easier, more navigable, more relevant day to day. Some of it probably has to do with marketing. It's kind of crazy to me that you market a public service, but darn it, we'll do some marketing, some search engine optimization. That's part of the problem with government websites, by the way, in general. They're very hard to find, even if they're in good shape when you get there. But the other problem, I think, is to really suss out and understand what citizens want in terms of the facts. And so we ran a poll recently with Harris, the Harris Poll people, and asked a bunch of questions about what citizens are interested in when it comes to the facts. 88% of citizens said, and I was heartened by most of this, 88% of citizens say they prefer facts to anecdotes. And yet a lot of what we read in the paper and hear is anecdotes. I think anecdotes are great ways to get color and texture, but need to be anchored in real numbers. And I'm not an atypical citizen. 3 out of 4 people think most of the information they receive about government finances are biased. The number one, by the way, search query on our site is expenditures. People want to know what the money's going to. This was interesting. 77% of people in the United States, this was across Democrats and Republicans, urban and rural. You know, we had people from all states participate. 77% of people say civic education in the country is poor. It got us even more interested in seeing if we can work with educators to take the kind of stuff we've created and let them create even civics classes for the 11th grade level, where most kids get this in school. This one was particularly disheartening. Only 38% of people agreed with the idea that people generally agree on the facts, even if they have different beliefs. The general notion is people who don't agree basically aren't looking at the same underlying data. People will say that they will change their beliefs in evidence of information. You remember, this polls rich, poor, high school graduates, non-high school graduates, 80%. 88% of people say we need to use the same data to have an informed debate about what goes in the country. You know, what I found when I was at Microsoft was quite remarkable. I spent a lot of time actually getting data common and consistent for decision making. We'd get in meetings, though, and people would still say, we can't do this to our customers. And somebody else would say, we must do this. We have to really invest in this. And somebody else would say, no, we can't afford it. And when you got down to it, one guy was recommending an investment of $22 million, and the other person was recommending an investment of $25 million. The amount of shouting before people stood and looked at the same facts. In the old days of Microsoft, we used to have multiple accounting systems, and we couldn't even get people to agree how many copies of Microsoft Word we had sold. Getting these things to be consistent and understandable helps bring people to common ground. The guy who had to take care of the customer and the woman who, you know, had more interest in preserving finances, they may never have changed their beliefs, but they could reach more reasonable compromises than they would have otherwise. You'll be somewhat excited to know that while the numbers are small, local and state data is more trusted than federal data. I'm not sure you're going to be proud of 54%, but it's better than 53%, but it's better than 44%. And for the elected officials in the room, 78% of Americans believe that if they thought politicians were relying on government data, it would improve their trust in elected officials. And it is important that the data be government data. I don't understand how any organization thinks it's going to operate by using other people's information. It should be about using their own information. Governor Ducey and I were talking about this a little bit backstage. He used to be state treasurer in Arizona. And I asked, do you have like computer where you can just go and pull up these kinds of statistics? Well, it sounded like the financial data is easier to find than it might be outcome data on education, prisons. I was shocked, actually, by some of the things you learn in this process. The average sentence for a first-time violent offender, the average time served for a first-time violent offender, rape, murder, armed assault, etc., is only about 50 months. That kind of blew my mind, about 4 years for those offenses. But that kind of stuff would be important data to have. Different people might disagree about what's right and wrong, but it would be important data to have in these kinds of discussions. The next frontier for us is now actually to move to the state level. We have a lot of things we still want to do at the national level. But what would a 10K for government and an annual report and a website look like for the state of California, the state of Colorado, the state of North Dakota, the state of South Dakota? What would that look like? And it's important because you still want to add state, federal, and local dollars together, but see the overall impact in a state or in a school district or in a county. What is the money translating to in terms of outcomes? There's a good infrastructure across states in something that I've learned to call the CAFR, these financial reports produced at the state level. There's a problem, though. They don't focus as much on outcomes as they do on expenditures. And second, they don't match up with what the states report to the Census Bureau, which is the source of data we've already used. There's something not quite right in the way this works, but we will at least delve into and investigate those challenges. This is just a small example we threw together at some of our early work. We said, how does taxable income and taxpayers flow between states? If you are yellow on this chart or dark yellow, tax filers, we get this data from the IRS, tax filers are moving out of your state. If you are blue, tax filers are moving into your state. Not only are tax filers moving in your state, but adjustable gross income is moving into your state. So in Rhode Island, there was a net outflow of tax filers and tax revenue before about the year 2000. There was a net of inflow. I don't know what happened here in Rhode Island over time, but there was a net of inflow, and now there's been a net outflow again. I'll pick a second state here, Texas. Texas has been the state in which there has been the most inflow. By the time we're done, we'll be able to tell you how much is that people 65 plus versus people who are younger. That kind of data, not about just the average, but on specific citizens, we think is important. Texas has been a boom, people moving in the whole time. I'll show you just one more to give you a sense. Here's Louisiana. There was a trickle of people and money moving out of the state. What do you think happened with the spike? That's Katrina. Then there's a surge as some people move back into the state, and now it's leveled off again at a pretty flat level. I've looked at a few of the states. They all have some interesting story. You can sometimes see where tax rates went up or down. They actually show in the government data that you can look at. So as we go forward, a number of things. We have to keep this data up to speed. I'm committed on this project. It wasn't just a one-time, oh, that was fun, blah, blah, blah. We think it's an important effort that we are committed to for the long run. Since I'm a tech guy, I got to tell you that we have to fix and enhance our tech platform. That'll be important, particularly for making it easier and easier for people to access this data. My great dream someday is you can just type into the search engine, show me expenditures on education in the state of Oklahoma, and the data comes right back to you instead of sending you even to a set of tables to go look. I talked about civic education. One of the things I think is really important is that there be more data collection and usage. Particularly as we look at state data, I think it would be great if there was some level of standardization in how people take a look at these things. I've been learning about the Center for Best Practices as part of the National Governors Association. It sounds like a very interesting organization that receives private funding. Believe me, we'll dig into these things. When you look at what our visitors are interested in, you can see a set of things they're interested in at the national level. At the local level, I suppose we won't surprise any of you. Housing and homelessness is the top thing that people are looking for information on. Education, infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. Jobs and wages. This one surprised me because I would have thought people would associate this issue at the national level, but people are actually interested at the local level in this topic. Family composition surprised me as well. People want to know what percentage of single mothers do we have, how aged is our population, etc. We'll try to build this out. We're going to take one state to start. Haven't decided which one yet, but we'll take one state to start using just publicly available data. We'll build the 10K. This is tough stuff, actually. We have some interns from Stanford working for us this summer. They're eager beavers, young people, dive in. You know, we have them up in the state of Washington. I said, let's get on this. And one of them in our first kind of check-in says, well, it's a really exciting project, but there's some data I had to go to the state capitol in Olympia to get. I said, what do you mean you had to go to the state capitol in Olympia? They said, well, the data's public, but you actually have to go in the building to get it for privacy purposes. I said, how can it enhance privacy that you have to walk into the building? I don't know. I think there's some work to do even at the state level to continue to improve the accessibility and value of data. I appreciate your time today. We're very interested, as we like to say in our nation, in numbers, broadening out to the state level. I think the notion of informed debate through facts is one of the things that, frankly, will do the most to help curb the rancorous discussions that we hear today in politics. I think particularly at the state level, governors have to be more practical, more action-oriented. It really is an executive function, and the notion of really having the same kinds of tools you have to instrument and understand how to operate your business, I think every state governor, legislator deserves. Thank you very much. USAFacts.org, or follow us on Twitter. Thank you.